Hi there, future teacher, and welcome to video number 3 within our Life Science Test Prep video lesson series, here to help you get that passing score on your upcoming Praxis 5005 exam. Now, in this very video, we are going to be building off of the content from video number 2, so if you haven't already, make sure to watch that. And then we're going to segue into 4 different key concepts that you'll want to know for your exam. And those include life cycles, mutations, adaptation, and natural selection. Now, if you aren't already enrolled into our Teacher Prep's full-length test prep, I've left a link in the description below. Go ahead and check that out so you get instant access to all of our Praxis material. All right, without further ado, let's begin this lesson. All right, now let's go ahead and take a look at the Mendelian inheritance, or the laws created by Gregor Mendel. His law of segregation stated that each gamete receives one allele for each gene, while his law of independent assortment indicated that alleles for different genes usually separate independently into gametes. Did you know that you can predict inheritance with the use of Punnett squares? Take a look at this. Pause the video and have a look at this tool. Now, this is a tool that we can use to predict possible genotypes of different of offspring when the genotypes of the parents are known. Notice that the dominant traits are marked with the capital letters, which we talked about earlier, and the recessive traits are lowercase. So two capitals will have the TT capital, right? And once you mix them, you will have one large T and one lowercase t. All right, so make sure you pause the video, look at the difference, dominant and recessive. All right, now let's keep it moving. In Punnett squares, we use what's called a monohybrid cross to study the inheritance of a single trait, such as an eye color. Now, if you receive a question on exam day about the purpose of using a monohybrid cross, look for an answer option that states that this method helps us predict for parents how a trait will be passed on based off the traits of the parents for the offspring. Moving on to molecular basis of heredity, starting with DNA and genes. First, let's understand that DNA is the molecule storing genetic information, right? Now, it's simple to remember. A gene is a piece of DNA that tells the body how to make a protein or a functional RNA molecule. Next up, let's talk about the exam topics regarding change over time in living things. Key topics to understand for this lesson include the following. First, life cycles. Second, mutations. Third, adaptation. And fourth, natural selection. Let's start with the life cycle by getting to know the basic concepts within this topic. Remember, life cycle is the series of stages an organism goes through from birth to reproduction. We also have asexual reproduction, where one parent produces genetically identical offspring, such as bacteria dividing, while sexual reproduction is when two parents produce genetically diverse offspring through an egg and sperm. Here are the types of sexual life cycles that you will want to be familiar with for your upcoming exam. In simple terms, humans are mostly diploid, which means each adult has 2 sets of chromosomes, one from each parent. The gametes, which are sperm and eggs, are haploid, meaning they only have one set of chromosomes. When a sperm and an egg come together during fertilization, they restore the 2 sets, making a diploid again. This is how we get our full set of chromosomes in each new person. Furthermore, let's talk about some plants. In plants, there's a cycle called alternation of generations. This is how plants create spores to start new plants. Pause the video here and take a look at the different stages. Let's now move on to mutation, which is a change in the DNA sequence. This can occur randomly and can be passed on if it occurs in reproductive cells. It can be caused by errors during DNA or environmental factors such as radiation or even chemicals. And some mutations don't really change how an organism lives. They don't help it or hurt it. They're just neutral. Mutations can also be beneficial, such as camouflage. And others can be harmful, where it decreases survival or reproductive success, such as genetic disease. All right, we still doing good? Great. Now let's move on to adaptation and natural selection. Really interesting topic and one you'll want to be prepared for your exam. Now, adaptation, remember, is a hereditable trait that increases an organism's ability to survive and reproduce. Natural selection, or Darwin's theory, states that individuals with traits well suited to their environment tend to survive longer and produce more offspring. Now, for natural selection to happen, individuals in a group need to have different traits from each other. This is called variation. Traits must be passed from parents to offspring genetically. And natural selection can be seen in the Galapagos finches, as observed by Charles Darwin, where different islands have finches with different beak shapes, which are suited for the specific local food in that particular island. Very interesting. All right, now moving on to the topic of evolution, which means change in traits of a population over multiple generations. All right, now let's shift our attention to unity and diversity of life, adaptation, as well as classification. This is a whole segment on your upcoming Praxis 5005 exam, and let's dive into it right now. By the end of this chapter, you'll have a firm grasp for these topics. First and foremost, unity and diversity of life. Second, adaptation through natural selection. And third, classification. Remember, we can also call this taxonomy, and we even sometimes see it as the tree of life. Now, let's start with the first topic, unity and diversity of life. Recall that all living organisms are made of cells and that cells are basic units of life, and they can be classified into two main types. The first are called prokaryotic cells, and these have no nucleus. In contrast, eukaryotic cells do have a nucleus and are usually larger and more complex. Remember, all forms of life share similar molecules such as RNA, DNA, and proteins, as well as use genetic information in order to guide the building of the proteins. Now, diversity arises through differences in the DNA among individuals in a population. Over time, beneficial traits that help organisms survive and reproduce become more common. And this makes sense, right? Now, as groups of organisms accumulate different adaptations, they can eventually split into different species, increasing our biodiversity. Note that biodiversity is not uniform across the globe, and here are the factors influencing distribution. So, first, we can think of factors such as climate, temperature, availability of water, as well as geographic barriers such as mountains, rivers, oceans, and the like. Next, we can also think of the absence of certain organisms, such as food sources, and danger from predators or even parasites, which can all dictate where living things choose to live. Then we have chance events where islands like the Galapagos and isolated habitats drive unique adaptations and species formation due to the location. And up next, we're going to discuss an important exam topic called classification, again, also taxonomy. And if you haven't been already, I highly recommend to take some notes for this section. This structure that you can see on your screen helps us to organize and understand relationships among species. All right, here you see the labeled diagram, and in taxonomy, the domain is the broadest category, which in this case on the screen, you can see at the top, it's the broadest category. I know it's hard to read all the way there down at the bottom, but in the littlest section, we call that species. For example, humans belong to the species Homo sapiens.